watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back, everybody. Your host, Michael, on a Thursday evening. Going to be joined by Mike Aquilina here in just a moment, returning guest. I am a major fan of his work. He's, of course, Catholic author and expert on the Church Fathers. In fact, I recall when I started getting into Catholicism when I was still a Protestant, I would type in Church Fathers on Amazon and all of his books would come up. And if you're interested in the Church Fathers, the patristics, you definitely want to read his books. And speaking of which, what we're going to be doing today is discussing the Church Fathers, Friendship and the Fathers. This is a recent book just published by Mike. It is subtitled How the Early Church Evangelized. Of course, there is also a link there in the description to this video if you would like to get a copy of it and make a purchase. So definitely check that link out. Going to bring on Mike Aquilina coming up next. Mike, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me back, Michael.
Always an honor and a pleasure. Like I said, I've really enjoyed your works in the past, and I think you have a lot of excellent insights when it comes to the Church Fathers. So I'm really looking forward to this one because it involves one of my favorite topics, the patristics, and also evangelization, and how, of course, that ties into friendship, which is kind of a different angle. You know, we don't hear about the aspect of friendship when it comes to evangelization and also the Church Fathers. So I'm really excited about this. So let's go ahead and dive in. I would ask you first, so, how would you characterize the early Christians and the early Church Fathers' approach to friendship?
Well, the thing that first sensitized me to the issue, or even let me know that there is an issue, is, it was Rodney Stark's book back in 1997, The Rise of Christianity. He was a sociologist, and he was looking at those first 3 centuries when the church grew so rapidly and trying to figure out how they did it. Now, Stark did not identify at the time as a Christian. He identified as agnostic. But he wanted to find out how the church grew. And he states in the book that the evidence seems to be that the church grew worldwide at a steady rate of 40% per decade. 40% per decade for almost 300 years. That's impressive.
Right.
And so, when I saw numbers like that, I thought, well, we might have something to learn from them. How did they do it?
Right.
Well, Stark goes through some of the urban legends and that sort of thing in his book, and he debunks them pretty easily. Some people say, there's kind of a fideist approach where they say, well, it was all these mass conversions like we see in the 2nd chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. The fire fell and everybody was converted, and that's how it happened. The problem with that is that there's no evidence that ever happened again. It's the only mass conversion we know about in the documents of the early church. So there's no evidence of that. Other people say, well, it happened because of class struggle. Right. The church gave the poor people a support network. It gave them a place to gather, and it was a place where they could have power in numbers. But again, there's no evidence of that either,
And they were being persecuted.
And they were being persecuted. Right. I mean, this was not the smart way to gather and gain power. So what happened? And Stark pretty much boils it down to a few different factors. But the big one for me, when I was reading the book, was friendship. That Christians made an effort to befriend their neighbors and to show that friendship through real action. And that made a difference. That's what converted the people next door. And that's how the world was converted. It wasn't through mass conversion. It wasn't through class envy. It wasn't through any of those means. It was by being a neighbor to the people who live next to you, befriending them, and growing in friendship. That's how the early church evangelized.
So according to the early church, you could be friends with a non-Christian. I mean, this is going to be news to some Christians. They tend to think that you can only be friends with other Christians. What's the view there?
Yeah, that was not the view. It's interesting because there's a lot of discussion in antiquity about what is friendship, what is a friend. And both Aristotle and Cicero said that you could not be friends with someone who was your social unequal, right? If someone was richer or poorer than you really couldn't be friends. And Cicero really had a kind of restrictive view of friendship. He said friendship was a perfect conformity of opinions upon all religious and civil subjects, united with the highest degree of mutual esteem and affection. So Cicero's setting the bar really high, making it really difficult for you to find other friends. It's kind of like social media today. Cicero wanted people to live in a bubble with people who were exactly like them in terms of their opinions, in terms of their income, in terms of their social class and standing. Christians and Aristotle said similar things. Christians would not behave that way. Now, why is that? Because God became man in Jesus Christ. God took flesh, right? And God befriended his disciples. He first taught them how to be servants of God. But then at the Last Supper, he said, I have called you friends. And he gave them this new status. Suddenly, here are these guys who are not particularly bright, not particularly wealthy, not particularly anything notable. And God himself is taking flesh, and he's befriending them. He's calling them friends. That's a remarkable thing. Aristotle even used the example of a god having friendship with a man as a logical impossibility. And yet here is God himself violating Aristotle's rules. So that was the standard. That was the standard for friendship, and Christians kind of had that sort of openness to friendship with everyone.
When you say there that Aristotle was opposed to the idea that God could befriend us, it kind of goes against Genesis. So where exactly did the church fathers get their understanding of friendship from? Did it come from the Bible, like Genesis or the New Testament?
Well, when we look at Genesis, we do find evidence of God befriending man, right? Unfortunately, we don't really find it till after the fall, right? Because there we find out that God walked in the cool of the day in Eden, as was his custom, right? But suddenly, by this time, the man and the woman are alienated from God, and so they're trying to figure out, where do we stand now? Suddenly, they've violated the friendship, and they're no longer enjoying that kind of camaraderie with the Lord God. The Epistle of James tells us that Abraham was a friend of God, right? So, I mean, there we have an example of someone who, in spite of this alienation between man and God, cultivated friendship with God. I'm just at this moment texting my wife and my daughter.
No problem.
because my dog will not stop barking.
No problem at all. Sometimes I hear a neighbor's dog barking every now and then, and it gets picked up on the microphone. So I know how that goes. Although that dog I can't control. So, yeah, I totally.
But you're not armed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I totally get it. And like I was saying earlier, backstage, sometimes I have this background noise. It sounds like a lot of air, but what it is it's extremely hard rain on the ceiling that hasn't
Louisiana
been
rain.
Yeah, right. And it hasn't been sheetrocked yet. Yeah. So there's not a whole lot there dampening the sound. So
let me continue though with what I was saying when the dog rudely interrupted me.
Sure.
And Moses, we're just in the Old Testament. We see that Moses spoke to God as a man speaks with his friend, right? So that this level of intimacy is possible. We can see it in extraordinary people whom God has gifted in this way. On the other hand, when you find those who want to force that kind of intimacy, that kind of closeness with God, it doesn't end well for them. There are a couple of different instances in the Old Testament where people try to reach out to touch sacred things like the Ark of the Covenant, and they're struck down immediately. They're struck dead. because that kind of intimacy is not possible. It's not accessible unless God grants it in an extraordinary way. When our Lord comes, we find that that he wants to extend this friendship, and elsewhere in the New Testament, it's called salvation, that it's his will that all should be saved.
So, I mean, they're effectively getting this from Scripture and the witness there that comes from divine revelation, from what it sounds like. But from what you also mentioned, it kind of sounds like this patristic view tends to clash with other figures like Aristotle and Cicero. So, how does it fare with others in their perspective of friendship?
Well, I mean, they were just upsetting that apple cart. This idea of friendship that our Lord proposed and that the apostles exemplified was something revolutionary. It was something that was not there before Christianity, and we can see the apostles living it through the Acts of the Apostles. They befriend others, and they treat them kindly. They reach out that way. We're living in a time, or they were living in a time, I should say, of extraordinary loneliness. It seems to me, because you had, the institution of marriage was beginning to fail. The Roman Empire was prospering, and Caesar Augustus could not persuade the Romans to have children. All right, there was not the desire to share all of the goods of life with another person. So marriage is failing. There's no desire to pass all the great things we have on to another generation, and yet people have all of these material goods. There's a discernible loneliness in the documents of this time, and a sadness. And Augustus tried to legislate various remedies to this, and he failed. And later emperors tried the same thing. They tried to legislate happiness in marriage so people would stay married and have children. They gave tax incentives for this, and they gave tax penalties for those who violated these ideals. And they could not do it. They could not make people love one another. Yet all our Lord had to do was propose it. I have called you friends, and people were willing to take up that challenge and imitate it in their own lives. And that's really how the world was converted. And it was converted that rapidly, so rapidly as to alarm the authorities wherever Christianity made its appearance.
I did not know that about the Roman Empire at that time, that a lot of people were experiencing loneliness. It sounds kind of like us today, which is ironic since we have access to everybody at our fingertips, but at the same time, we're not very fulfilled when it comes to friendships.
Well, I think there is a great analogy or a great parallel with the times we're living in now. One of the things I mentioned in my book is a longitudinal study on friendship and social isolation that was done from 1985 to 2005 by sociologists at the University of Arizona and Duke University. Mm-hmm. And, they wanted to find out how Americans experienced friendship, how they conducted friendship. And in 1985, when the study began, most Americans reported that they could name 3 people they considered very close friends and confidants. So the average American had 3 close friends. 20 years later, in 2005, 1 in 4 Americans was already reporting, having no close friends at all. 1 in 4 Americans. Now, I have not seen any update on that data since 2005, but my guess is that there hasn't been a wild upturn in the reports of friendship. So you had an increasing number of people reporting that they don't have friends. In 2018, the British government officially, publicly recognized loneliness as a public health crisis. Most of the country's GPs, general practitioners, had said that they saw at least 1 patient every day whose primary problem was loneliness. And so what did the United Kingdom do? Well, they established a ministry for loneliness and appointed a minister for loneliness. It reminds me of Monty Python, the Ministry of Silly Walks, Well, now there's a ministry for loneliness, and they're asking doctors to prescribe human interaction so that people could get out of this rut they're in, which has been causing all kinds of physical ailments as well.
It seems like there's a natural solution, or one of the solutions would be a natural one that we find in the community that Christ established. When we have fellowship with other Christians, it seems that that would somewhat offset that problem of loneliness. Any thoughts there?
If we're doing our thing as Christians, this should not be a problem. I
Yeah.
think that what we see in that longitudinal study from Duke University, and what we see in the establishment of a ministry for loneliness,
Mhm.
is the failure of Christians to do what
Yeah.
they're supposed to do, which
Right.
is reach out in friendship to the world, to do what Jesus did, to befriend the world and to bring the world into the fold through friendship. Um, I think that this is our job, and we're not doing it.
I think there's definitely something to be said there. It seems like you could go to a mass these days, at a new parish, and no nobody. You might actually go there, worship, and nobody speaks to you. So I
Yeah,
think we could definitely step it up there. Now, when it comes to the early church, what are some maybe practical differences that they made in the way that they went about conducting friendship? Did it really have an impact on society, and did society observe this impact?
I'd say yes. When you read the apologies of Justin Martyr, for example, or of Tertullian, they state publicly all of the great uh, actions that are associated with Christians at that time. Now, this is not a time when there are institutional charities within the church. There's no office for Catholic charities in the chancery because there's no chancery. The church is an illegal entity. It doesn't have employees. It doesn't do things that way, and it won't do things that way for another couple centuries. But they talk about how Christians are known for feeding the poor, for burying the dead, for visiting prisoners, for helping those who are shipwrecked. All of these charitable activities, and Tertullian even says that the pagans had a saying: "See those Christians, how they love one another," right? And truly, they were showing this love to the world beyond the church as well. The church was a close community, but Saint Cyprian of Carthage, in a time of pandemic, um, counseled Christians not to minister only to other Christians, but to turn their attention outward and to minister to those who were sick with the plague, who were pagans. Now you think about this and you think, oh yeah, well that sounds like a nice pious thing, but what he's asking them to do is to help their persecutors, to feed their persecutors, to heal their persecutors, to take them in, to give them a place to stay when their own family had abandoned them or died. This is a remarkable thing. It's a revolutionary thing. As I said, uh, everybody everybody loves their friends, right? But who loves their enemies that way? Only Christians do. And Cyprian was laying that down as a challenge and just as a rule. This is how Christians behave. This is how Christians befriend the world.
Seems like that's a really good way to evangelize, and I'm sure that's how it ties into the book, because people are going to be impressed when they see that. If we are offering food or shelter or things like that to those who persecute us, that speaks volumes. It kind of reminds me of in the patristic era when Christians were, told to renounce Christ and pay
Mhm.
homage to Caesar, and they did not do so in spite of persecution. It would motivate the other pagans who were there, who witnessed the Christians' faith, and sometimes inspire them to convert themselves. So, I mean,
Justin Martyr is a prime example.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
he witnessed the martyrdom of Christians, and he said, "I want what those people have," and eventually he got what they got too. But not before he had decades and decades of Christian witness behind him.
Yeah, but I think that this is a really good point that you're bringing out, because I think it has implications on evangelism today, because it's something that we really need to step up. So I think you're really good in noting these connections. Let me ask you this: what are some documents and also authors that really motivated you, inspired you to write this book?
When I was digging into the texts I wanted to use in the book, the one that really struck me and deeply moved me was the Octavius by Minutius Felix. It's a beautiful story. It's this novelistic memoir written in a stunning style, and it's produced at the end of the 100s, possibly the beginning of the 200s. So late second century, early third century, and it's written by a prominent lawyer in Rome who also happened to be a Christian. He's writing this memoir in honor of his friend Octavius, who had died, and it's just a story about a vacation they took together with another friend named Cecil uh, years before, right? Now, these three are lawyers practicing in Rome, so they're colleagues. They have mutual respect, mutual affection. They work together. It's a holiday, so they're gonna vacation together, and they go out to Ostia, which is one of my favorite places on earth. And they go out there. It's a resort town by the harbor, and it's a beautiful text in that it describes what was going on in Ostia at that time. You know, he talks about children skipping stones and seashells in the ocean. It's a very beautiful text in that way. But what happens is two of the guys are Christians.
Mhm.
One is not. One is follows the traditional Roman religion. So they're walking into the city. They just arrived. They're walking into Ostia, and the one who's not a Christian turns to this statue of the Egyptian god Serapis, and he blows a kiss to the idol.
Mhm.
So Octavius says, "I can't remain silent. Friends don't let friends worship dead idols, and I have to correct you, you know." And so he says that, and it just casts a pall on the vacation at the very beginning.
Mm.
The three of them just stop talking, and there's an awkward silence in which Minutius Felix is describing everything except his friends, right? And finally, Cecil says, "You know what? That hurt me when you said that." Now, these three guys are lawyers. So Cecil proposes, why don't we debate this? Why don't we discuss this? And Minutius Felix, Marcus, our friend, will judge us. He'll hear our arguments and he'll judge fairly who's the winner. And they have that kind of trust. He knows that Marcus will be a fair judge. So for the rest of the weekend, they do what lawyers do. They argue with each other and they're having a great time, right? Cecil brings up all of what he considers the strongest arguments against God, the Christian conception of God. For example, he says, there bad things happen to good people. How do you square that with God's providence? And then he goes on to say, if the world is as chaotic as it seems to be, aren't you safer just sticking with the old gods, right? Because they're tried and tested, whereas this Christianity, it's not 100 years old. So he goes through these things one by one, and finally he says, look, if these gods have been worshipped in Rome for hundreds of years and Rome has prospered, it seems at least ungrateful not to worship them now. And it seems unpatriotic to renounce them. So he's defending the criminality, of Christianity. So then Octavius takes up the response, argues against his friend, and they're off and running. This goes back and forth. And finally, at the end of the discussion, at the end of their vacation, Cecil says to Marcus, you don't have to make a judgment. You've made me a Christian. And he converts. So two Christians and a pagan had gone in. 3 Christians come out of Ostia. That is my favorite text on friendship from the ancient church. It doesn't discuss friendship philosophically or theologically or anything. It never mentions the name of Jesus. It never quotes scripture. And yet it's this beautiful picture. It's a snapshot of how friendship changed hearts and changed lives.
That's awesome. You know what? I have to confess, I have not read that treatise yet, so I need to do so.
I bet you're
Um,
gonna read it.
I'm going to. In fact, I know I have it behind me, so
Yeah.
I'm
Yes, I
definitely
can
going
see
to.
it.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen it. I just have not read that particular one yet. Now, let me ask you this. I don't have any pagan friends, not that I know of, and I also don't have any persecutors that I'm letting into my home to evangelize. So, how can this relate? What we've discussed so far. How does that relate to modern relationships and what we're going through today?
You know what? I'll bet you have lonely friends.
Mm.
I'll bet you have friends who are alienated from the church for one reason or another, or friends who just don't practice any religion. I've got a lot of friends who weren't really raised anything, so they don't have that connection to a church. They don't have a background of Christian faith they can draw upon. What they need to see is what Christianity looks like. They don't need to hear 5 points of doctrine that you can deliver to them in 10 minutes or whatever. They need to see what Christianity looks like and how attractive it is. They need to look at people and say, I want what that person has. There's a great description in a letter of Dionysius the Great, who was bishop in Alexandria in the middle of the 3rd century. And he's describing what happened in his city during the great pandemic of that time. And he describes Christians taking care of one another, taking care of their pagan neighbors. And you know what happens at the end of the epidemic? Well, the pagan neighbors say, I want what that guy has. He's got something he's willing to die for. So he has something he's living for. And I don't have that. They recognize that there's something missing in their lives if they don't have that kind of passion that Christians have for taking care of other people. And it can be simple things. It could be visiting your neighbors, especially those who are elderly and alone. It can be making a meal for them during a difficult time or a not so difficult time, inviting them over. It could be bringing them, your kids' artwork, for them to put on the refrigerator. Have the kids draw them a picture of something beautiful. It certainly doesn't have to be a religious scene, but it's just something beautiful. Those things become like sacred icons in their homes because they're signs of love, and they reflect the love of God in their homes. So I think that we have to think in terms of basic friendship. We're not instrumentalizing friendship. We're not befriending people in order to convert them. We're befriending them because Christ befriended us. We're imitating Jesus Christ by making friends. That's what we're doing. And even if you don't have all-out pagans next door who are blowing kisses to the statue of Serapis in your town square, you do have people who need your friendship and need Christ too.
That's a really good point that, you had just mentioned there that we don't necessarily befriend them to evangelize them. We befriend them because God befriended us. And of course, evangelization would follow naturally from that. I think that's a really good point.
Friendship is a good in itself. It's a natural good, and grace builds on nature.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that a lot of us don't consider, especially when it comes to non-Christians. I think there's some hesitancy of Christians to befriend other Christians unless they specifically have the intention of evangelizing them. They think that somehow this is wrong if I were to do that.
There's a great quote from a saint of the 20th century, Saint Jose Maria Escrivá. He said, out of 100 people, we should be interested in 100. Out of 100 people, we should be interested in 100 because people are interesting. Once you take the time to get to know them, once you open yourself to friendship, but we should be open to friendship with 100 out of 100. That's the way the early Christians were, and that's the way we should be too. It's certainly the way Jesus is.
Now, how does this also apply to us in an age of social media? Can I apply these lessons to me on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, acquaintances that I have there, or is this just something that applies to friendships that I have in person?
No, I think that it does apply. There are serious differences between our world and the ancient world. You think about it. One of the great problems that you described earlier in the show is, you go to church, nobody knows anybody else sometimes. This is the problem of suburban churches that serve a wide area, and then suburban neighborhoods where people live in these rows of houses, but they don't know the people on either side of them. They don't know the people across the street or the people behind them. They don't know their names. Why? Because well, we drive somewhere else to go to work, and we come back home, we drive the car into the garage, and we don't come out again until we drive to work again. So we don't take the time to get to know the people around us, but those are the people God is putting in our lives. They're next door to us. So we need to make the effort to get to know the people who are nearest to us, and reach out to them. They might not always welcome it. They might not always, respond in the way we want, but they'll know we're there. And in a time of need, they'll know that they can count on those people next door who are always saying hello, whose names they know and with whom they have some connection. In the ancient world, in a sense, it was a little easier because people did not have the kind of mobility that we have today. So you generally died in the place where you were born, right? And maybe even in the same house. So you live in this place, the people on your street, you're in very close quarters, and your work puts you in touch with them day after day after day. So if you're working a little market stall, you're seeing the same people all the time. That's not so much the case today, and so we have to make allowances for this. You mentioned social media, and of course, I think that the early Christians give us good models for that as well, because they were fearless in their witness, but they were also kind and good-humored when they were persecuted. When we read about the death of Perpetua, we don't find her, raging against the people who are going to destroy her life. The people who are there to kill her. We find her showing them real love, so that the jailer is converted, and the executioner can barely follow through on the command. We should be showing that kind of love to the people who persecute us, the people who are mean-spirited, the people who are nasty. It doesn't mean that we have to engage forever, in these in the back and forth, but we should never respond in kind. I'd say that's the number one rule. We should not become what our persecutors are.
Now, you also in the book go over different friendships that certain fathers had with other fathers. So, what would you say are some lessons that we can learn from these friendships in their lives?
Well, there are a couple of great examples, exemplars for cultivating friendship. One of the friendships I look into is the lifelong friendship of Basil the Great and Gregory of Nazianzus. And they were friends from the time they were in school together. They eventually became housemates. They came to live together during college, and they encouraged one another in study and prayer and in moral life. And then they regrouped back home in Cappadocia, and Basil kind of quickly rose up through the ranks and became the metropolitan of that region. He very much wanted Gregory to become one of the suffragan bishops in his area, so that he would have a reliable second in the city or in the area, and so he named him bishop, and just kind of badgered Gregory until he agreed. And Gregory, for the rest of his life, resented that. He called it a violence, but really he had caved in. Basil, I'm sure it was hard to argue with, but he caved in, and Gregory was hypersensitive. Gregory could be, or Basil could be insensitive. He could be obtuse, and so their friendship took a lot of knocks. It had periods of alienation, and they had to mend the relationship at a few points. In the end, Gregory survived Basil and actually preached a beautiful eulogy after his death. It's a long work, and it's essentially a biography of his deceased companion, and it shows the power of friendship even after times of alienation and through difficult times. That the bond was still there. Another great exemplar is Saint Augustine, and man, that guy must have been an amazing friend, because you read his autobiography, the Confessions, and you find that his childhood friends pretty much followed him all through his life. When he went to Italy for professional reasons, he went to take a job in Italy, in Rome, and then in Milan. His friends from Africa went with him, or they went after him anyway, and they all lived together there in Milan, near Milan anyway. And he left us a great record of their dialogues, these friendly conversations that they had in their country house over the time of his conversion. So Augustine just had this warmth about him, this openness to friendship, and this desire to keep friendships going. Friendship was always important to him, and he the great trauma of his early life that he describes in the Confessions is the death of one of his friends. So later in life, we find him considering friendship in many ways, discussing it in many places with Paulinus of Nola, whom he'd never met in person. He carried on a correspondence for many years, and they tried to reason together to figure out how does friendship happen when you never have physical proximity. So there were all these great examples of the fathers' openness to friendship, their dedication to friendship even through difficult times, and their loyalty to their friends. So the stories are all there in the book. They come through vividly in a lot of these lives. I tried to rely on the original documents as much as possible.
You speak there of Augustine and friendship. Could you maybe briefly comment on his friendship with Saint Jerome?
Yes, and I have quite a bit of their correspondence in the book, and he reaches out to Jerome because both of them were major intellectuals at that time. They were kind of celebrities, world celebrities at that time, and he had a couple of bones to pick with Jerome. He was somewhat critical of a couple of Jerome's projects, his pet projects. Now, if you know anything about Jerome, he was the most irascible character in the ancient church, right? God's angry man, his crotchety scholar, was St. Jerome, the great name caller, right? So what do? You write a letter to Jerome and you tell him what he's doing wrong? Man, you better duck. So a lot of things went wrong with their correspondence. Augustine once wrote a letter to Jerome. It never reached Jerome, but somehow it got leaked, and people were talking about it in Rome while Jerome was in Palestine, and the rumors reached Jerome of the letter before he got the letter. As a matter of fact, he never got that letter. So you have all of these things going wrong. But what you find in Augustine is someone who knows how to do diplomacy. He's a rhetorician, and he knows how to approach someone in a kind and positive way, flatter him a little bit. He does that, and keep the conversation going forward. Jerome is kind of grumpy with them at the beginning of their correspondence, but eventually he wears him down. That Augustine wears him down that way, just through his kindness, and that's what endures in their relationship from that moment forward. They never met in person. Their friendship was largely epistolary. It was through letters, just like his friendship with Paulinus. Augustine was a genius of friendship, and so we have so much that we can learn from him through his account of his life, through those dialogues where he describes his conversations with his friends, but also through his letters. It's as if these long-distance correspondences confirm what we see in the dialogues and what we see in the confessions. Augustine makes these claims about friendships, but the letters really do bear them out.
Now, towards the end, you have a section on third century solutions to 21st century problems. What are some of the problems and solutions that we haven't discussed yet that you mentioned in that chapter?
I think we've managed to cover just about all of them. I do go into a bit of detail there at the end, but I think that we need to get familiar with the history of that period, because it can be daunting when we see that the church was growing at a rate of 40% per decade worldwide. That can be daunting. Why aren't we doing that? It's kind of depressing. We're not even close to that. We're just kind of hanging on. So what do we need to do to get to that? Well, it's encouraging because it shows us that it's possible. We have a lot of things at our disposal that people didn't have in the first century, second century, third century. We have telephones. We can call people during our downtime. We can have a list of people even we haven't spoken to in some time, and we can move down the list and then start at the top of the list again, just as we find we have time for a 5-minute phone call or however much time we have at hand. That can be a wonderful thing to do. We can make an effort and hold ourselves accountable. We can say, do I know the names of my neighbors? Do I know the names of the people who live on either side of me? And how well do I know them? What can I do for them? What can I do to reach out to them and show what Christian friendship looks like? I think these are the challenges for us today, just as they were the challenges for Christians in the first century. At this point, we should know better, and maybe that's why God has permitted us to kind of fall into this place where we find ourselves today, where we need to rebuild Christendom from the ground up. We can't rely on social structures that are 1,000 years old anymore, or 2,000 years old. We need to build from the ground up, and so we're best off learning from the history of those who have done it successfully before.
Do you have just a few moments for a few live chat questions? I see some there in the chat.
Yeah.
This one is from Kyle Marks. I missed a lot of the show, but if this hasn't already been answered, should one always seek to convert non-Christian friends every meetup?
I think that it's hard to build a friendship if you're seen to be a pest. I was actually a non-practicing Catholic, really questioning belief in God during my undergraduate years, and I probably would have identified as atheist at various points in that journey. But I can remember a conversation I had once where I was talking to an evangelical friend, and I got the strong sense that his prayer group, his campus prayer group, was always talking about me like I was some kind of project. I'm not your science project. Don't treat me that way. People don't want to feel used. They don't want to feel you're using them to get a notch in their gun or something like that. They want to feel like your friendship is genuine. It's not instrumental. You're not trying to get something out of them, something you can brag about, that they themselves are good because God made them that way, and that you enjoy their company because of their goodness that God made them for. That they are an image and likeness of God. You are interested in them, and I think that's the only way that friendship can go forward. Now, over time, they'll be interested in our faith. That's true. That's something that bears itself out in many ways. We have to be patient with it. We have to show them that we're in it for the long haul.
This one is from VM. I've lost close secular friends on contentious moral topics taught by the church. How does one approach such topics in friendships, or is this inevitable?
That's a tough one. And I think all of us have relationships like that today, where we're living in a time where everything's so polarized, and everything's so tribal. You either belong to my tribe with this set of beliefs, or you don't. You are there, in the outer darkness where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. I think that we need to show that Christians do not behave that way, and that though they may cut us off, we're not cutting them off. That our door is always open to them, and they should be aware of that. Look, if you feel that way, if you feel you can't talk to me, I'll respect that. I'm not going to hound you. I'm not going to chase you down. But I just want to know. I want you to know that my door is always open to you, because we can carry on the conversation, or we can say, you know what, there are certain topics we probably shouldn't talk about, when we're together like this, and we can respect those areas, and just wait for the right moment, maybe years down the road, but we should make an effort to remain in their lives to the degree we can. That doesn't mean we compromise. That doesn't mean we say that we believe something we don't, or we deny that we believe something we do. We should be ourselves, but sometimes we may have to pull back from contact, just out of respect for them, and we should just let them know that we're still here for them.
This one is from Thunder Thumbs. He asks, can men and women be friends in an authentic way? Because from the beginning in Genesis, it seems like relationships between two genders seems ordered to marriage. Anything that you could offer here, especially from the fathers?
Well, I think especially in our fallen condition, there are certainly temptations there. And it's very easy for us to form a particular friendship that might make things difficult for other areas of our life, especially if we're married. That's probably an area where we don't want to form a close bond that might disrupt our marriage. At the same time, I think it is possible to have friendships, and I do have many friendships with women. We just have to be careful of the boundaries, and we have to honor the boundaries. I think our ancestors were very wise in a lot of these ways, and they knew how to conduct friendship without transgressing the boundaries or leaving ourselves open to temptations.
Ethan asks, how do we toe the line between making friends with the people of the world, but not befriending the world itself, as Jesus says not to?
I think it's by, there are two senses of the world, and one is the world as what is opposed to God, and the other is the world that is good, that God created. And we can love the world in that sense, and we should love the world in that sense. Baseball is a wonderful thing that has arisen in God's creation, right? And it's a great bond between friends. You go to a game together, you talk about the standings in your team's division, and you go on from there. There's so much to love in the world. We should love those good things, and we should share that love with others. All of these things that are good in the world, whether it's baseball or stamp collecting or community service, all of these things that we can do that are good and healthy and wholesome things, can be another way of making friendships, meeting other people with common interests, people who would be open to having friendship with us, and going forward that way.
This is an interesting one from Nick Monk. I have a friend who is a Seventh-day Adventist, and we spend hours talking about the Bible every day, but his wife complained that he spends more time talking to me than to her. Should I tell him that I don't want to have these long discussions anymore?
You should tell him to listen to his wife. I mean, you don't have to put it in the negative terms, but tell him as a friend, if your wife is talking, you should be listening, and you should be following up on what your wife wants from you. That is the important bond in your life, and that's something you can do to actually advance your friendship forward. It can be a useful thing if you can do something that's non-religious with them. I used baseball as an example. Go to a game with them, or go out to eat with them and have a conversation that way, and include her. And if you're married, include your wife as well. If you have a girlfriend, and bring your girlfriend along and have a conversation that way. that can be a fun thing that advances the friendship without necessarily being all about religion, which can get tiresome.
Mike, I really want to thank you for coming on the show and talking about this. This has been really, really enlightening, and I really appreciate it, especially because I think that it's going to be very helpful for us Christians who really haven't thought about these things. We don't think of friendship a lot. We don't think of maybe some of the implications it also has on evangelization. So I really appreciate you doing this and coming on the show and talking about your book.
Michael, I always have a great time on your show, so I'm back whenever you want me.
Absolutely. And everybody, again, the book is Friendship and the Fathers. Go and check it out. Like I said, there is a link at the bottom of the description to this particular video. So you should be able to see it right now. In fact, it should be live. So go and check it out and purchase a copy. Again, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Always enjoy it.
Anytime, Michael.
And everybody, thank you for watching. Of course, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Share this on your social media. And also check us out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support us. Until next time, God bless. Can a personal planner really make you a saint? The truth is, many of us spend our lives running from distraction to distraction. And even for dedicated Catholics, our quest for sainthood often takes a backseat. The Saintmaker is the first high-performance planner for the spiritual life, made by faithful Catholics for faithful Catholics. Combining the practices of Catholic faithful throughout time with the science of personal productivity, the Saintmaker will help you grow in virtue and structure your spiritual life while getting organized and achieving ambitious goals. And that can help you become a saint. The Saintmaker is a beautiful, easy to carry, and well-crafted companion to your Missal, Bible, and Rosary. Published 4 times per year, each season includes daily planning pages, feast days, and devotions for both forms of the liturgical calendar, goal-setting pages, confession journals, and much more. There are lots of great Catholics using the Saintmaker, like Scott Williams, CEO of Sock Religious, best-selling author Sam Guzman, YouTubers like Dina Parka and Amber Schneider, and priests like Father Dean Marshall and Father Corey Stitcha. Try the Saintmaker out, and if you decide that it's not for you, you can send it back for a full refund within 90 days. Visit thesaintmaker.com/Reason and Theology to shop the planners and to start your Saintmaker journey today.